Hi, welcome back to Bedtime with Bruce. I am your host, Bruce. We are now going into our second hour, or the erotic hour of the show. We're on night two, for those of you that are just joining us. We started reading a book by Ashley Carter. That was actually a pen name for, I don't even remember the guy's name now, Harry something. I'll find out. And he wrote a series. This is the second book of a four-book series. It's called Secret of Blackoaks. We met the characters last night, just by way of recap. There's some slaves. There's a slave named Moab, who apparently is very good looking. There's the master of the house, Stiles Kenrick. He has a thing for Moab. They have a kind of a sex thing going on. My producer's showing me. Harry Whittington is the name of the author, the real name. Thank you. We've got Jamie Lee. She lives in the house. She's a sex-charged woman who has already tried to have sex with her cousin, and that didn't go well. Her cousin's name is Jordan. There's Mr. Hunt. He's in here. There's just a bunch of different characters. We'll jump in. Let's pick up where we left off. By daylight, half a dozen other planters arrived with their high-piled cotton wagons. Hunt stared at them, overwhelmed by the wagons lined along the lane all the way to the huge fieldstone gate out at the east-west trace. The landowners and their sons rode their elegantly groomed horses down to the barns where the long plank tables had been set up, covered with tablecloths from the houses. Beyond the work area at the sump of the incline leading up to the slave quarters, similar tables were set up for the blacks, without refinements of linen cloths or silverware. Smartly clad scrubbed youngsters in starched shirts and pressed breeches, most of them wearing polished shoes, hurried between the huge kitchen and the tables, delivering gallon containers of icy milk, steaming hot coffee, and thick cream, along with platters of freshly prepared food. The sun was well up beyond the pine hammock by the time the guest and other slaves had sat down to breakfast. Boz Pilsner and the overseers from other farms sat at a separate table with the younger sons of neighboring landowners. A bearded black man sat upon a straw-backed kitchen chair on the cotton-press platform and scraped lilting tunes from a fiddle. Black boys improvised dances on the wide steps below him. The tables were loaded with food. There were silver platters of fried ham, silver bowls of scrambled eggs, waffles, pancakes, cinnamon buns, and yeast-risen donuts were set in wicker servers and covered with linen napkins. Servants came running down the incline with plates of fried chicken. There was so much food, in fact, that the planters soon were sated and amused themselves tossing scraps to the dogs and children who came as near as the Estes the old butler would let them. Indeed, the black children often fought the dogs for slivers of fried ham. They scrambled on their knees to snatch the food from the snarling animals. Many of the planters purposely threw bits of meat so the children couldn't quite catch it. The men roared with laughter as the little blacks battled with the dogs, often getting slashed or bitten in the melee. A child brave or foolhardy enough to fight a dog for possession of a slice of ham would be rewarded by cheers from the white men at the long tables. Hunt sat far down the table from Stiles and Kathy, side by side at its head. Hunt didn't eat much. He quickly lost his appetite, angered by the way the black children were allowed to be bitten by the dogs. Walter Roy Somerton kept remarking that the pickaninnies were happy as little monkeys, but Hunt didn't believe him. Walter Roy peered at Hunt across the table, one brow tilted. "I'm somewhat astonished, Mr. Campbell, sir, if you'll pardon me, that you are still down here amongst us. I thought that when old man Baynard died, you'd leave this area," Gil Talmadge said. He laughed, shaking his head ruefully. "Reckon you might have, if my old man had lived." "Your father is dead?" Hunt said. He remembered old Fletcher Talmadge as a formidable, unyielding enemy. A man with a mind clamped steel trap shut against him. It was hard to believe the old redneck was dead. Gil nodded. He went on smiling, totally unmoved by the recent death of his father. Old man used to talk a lot about you leaving this part of the country. Got to be an obsession. Talked about using a rail a few times. Even mentioned chicken feathers and tar. Old Fletcher was a man didn't cotton to outsiders coming in here to tell us white folks how to run our lives, Walter Roy said. My old man didn't like to listen to nobody, Gil said, laughing. He got himself killed because he wouldn't no way listen to nary one of us. He got killed fighting, a half-broke stallion in our horse pens over at Felicity Hall Manor. Wouldn't let anyone else get that stallion under control. Weans tried to tell him he was getting too old. This just made the old fellow all the more obstinate and determined to do it his way. He said that stallion had to recognize its master. That old horse just reared up and Papa struck him across the nose with the bridle he had in his fist. The stallion squealed like a pig. It reared up on its hind legs, screaming and spitting. Before a living soul could get in there to help Papa, that stallion had cut him to death with his hooves, split Papa's head wide open. Yeah, Mr. Campbell, my Papa's dead all right, he laughed. He sure had a strong dislike for you, sir. Wasn't nothing really personal, neither. You was a Yankee, and that's all it took to stir his hatred. Link Tetherow put his head back, laughing. Seems to me there's reason enough for hating. Your daddy just wasn't never polite enough to hide his true and honest feelings. That's the truth, Gil said. If Papa felt a man was wrong, Papa wanted it to be the firstest to let him know he was in error, you know? He laughed. Seemed like he always had a calling to go around setting men right in their ways. I purely admired that old fellow, your daddy, Link Tetherow said. A man purely knowed when he stood with old Mr. Fletcher Talmadge. Gil laughed, striking Link hard on the bicep. You ought to have appreciated my old daddy. He pulled your meat out of the fire once when things looked mighty hairy. Link Tetherow's ruddy face went gray. He glanced in almost visible panic towards where his stern-visaged father talked with Lucas Wintercorn of Mira Vista and aging Rube Somerton of Foxwood. Cut out that talk, Gil, Link's voice shook. Ain't no sense bringing that old trouble up. You know how Papa gets. Gil laughed again mockingly. What you scared of, Link? Nothing can happen to you now. My daddy seen to that. You can just sleep as easy at night, old son, just like Walter Roy can. I told you, Gil, I don't never want to talk about that no more. Walter Roy's voice was hard and unyielding. What about you two yellow-bellies? What are you two yellow-bellies scared of? Gil glanced around, pleased to have stirred up a little action. He found Hunt as his nearest auditor. He grinned and spoke in a confidential tone, but loud. These boys and me, and good old Farrell Jr. Baynard, too, before he got the call and became Brother Alexandra in the Catholic Church, for hell's sake. Well, we had this little... Link swung out his arm suddenly and violently. He caught Gil across the face, crushing his nose. Gil was driven backward by the force of the blow. He would have gone sprawling to the ground, but a man on the other side of him caught him and supported him. Gil sat shaking his head for some moments, regaining his reeling senses. Then, before Link could protect himself, Gil lunged at him, both hands closing on Link's throat, fingers digging in on both sides of his Adam's apple as if he meant to rip it out of Link's neck. Link fought back wildly, and they toppled the bench, almost upsetting the table. They struck the ground wrestling. The dogs and the cats and the black children rushed forward, yapping and screaming. Link and Gil fought savagely. Link gasping for breath, and Gil refusing to release his grip on Link's throat, though Tetherow was obviously strangling. The older man at the head of the table glanced toward Stiles, but when Kendrick made no move to intervene, old Lucas Wintercorn lurched to his feet. He threw his napkin to the table. His voice carried thunder-like above the screaming children, the yowling and snarling of the excited dogs. Stop it, you men! Stop it! Have you no respect for the mistress of Blackoaks? Wintercorn's savage command cut through the caterwauling to Gil Talmadge and Link Tetherow, battering at each other mercilessly on the ground. Gil released his death grips on Link's throat. Gasping for air, young Tetherow withdrew the thumb from Gil's eye socket. They stood up, muddied, wrinkled, bruised, white-faced, and sheepish. Wintercorn said, I suggest you boys go wash up with some good cold well water. Then come back and finish your breakfast, if Miss Kendrick will permit you to return to her table. Kathy smiled and shrugged. You're most tolerant and forgiving, Miss Kenrick, Wintercorn said, and lovelier ere a burnt biscuit. The people at the table laughed with more vigor than his small compliment deserved. Gil and Link plodded towards the nearest well. The Estes moved in with a cornshuck's broom and batted all the black children and their dogs away from the area around the white cloth table. Many of the black men had finished their breakfast at the rough tables, and they got up, wiping their mouths on their arms. Most of the children ran to grab up the leavings, their dogs yapping at their heels. The fiddler, who had been stunned into immobility by the violence of the altercation between the young white gentlemen, now took up his instrument and bow again. His music rose, brittle and tentative in the morning stillness. Dray animals whinnied along the long lines of high-stacked cotton wagons. A fragile, self-conscious silence settled over the long table where the landowners sat. They began and abandoned short, uneasy conversations among themselves. Presently the hum of talk, less boisterous before, resumed. Lambert Tetherow, cold with embarrassment because of his son's behavior, felt impelled to do what he could to restore a semblance of normality to the breakfast table. He said with a falsely hearted laugh of self-congratulation, "Well, Stiles, I reckon we planters were right smart to hold back on our cotton last summer when they offered us 5 cents down at Mobile." Stiles nodded. Yes, prices are up. Demand is strong. Even for the lesser grades nobody wanted this summer. But as I've said before, it looks as if we're never going to grow really first-rate cotton in this area anymore. The older men stared at Stiles as if he'd uttered heresy. Some of them paled visibly. Others looked as if they'd bit their lips to keep from cursing Stiles Kenrick. You just don't disparage motherhood states' rights or the cotton economy in the company of gentlemen. Maybe you won't never grow first-grade cotton, Rube Somerton said, biting off each word carefully. But we will. Just a few miles down the road from you at Foxwood. We all will, sir, Winkerton said. It's just a plain matter of improved irrigation, of cultivation, and maybe a hardier seed stock. When we get friable earth prepared for planting, a good till, we'll grow the finest cotton again, just as we always have. I believe that day is gone for this part of Alabama, Mr. Wintercorn, sir, with all due respect, just as it passed many years ago in Maryland and in the Old Dominion. In all the states along the coast. Stiles tilted his head back and peered at them along his nose as if to warn he'd meet any opposing view with the disdain it deserved. Wintercorn met Stiles' imperious gaze levelly. I went along with you, Stiles, this summer when you felt we could get a better price by holding back our cotton. You were right then, but I part company with you now. Rube Somerton laughed. We brought them Yankee manufacturers back with their pocketbooks opened. It won't always work that way, Stiles said. I believe we ought to prepare for that contingency. This winter, there's a cotton shortage. They'll meet our demands. Prices are up, standards and gradings are relaxed. It may be years before all these factors coincide again. Rube Somerton leaned forward, staring at Stiles along the table. He spoke loudly, almost mockingly. Is that why you're sending so few wagons? I can tell you, young man, it's not by half of what old man Baynard sent every year down to Mobile. Stiles laughed disdainfully. Next year we'll send half that much. It costs more to plant cotton, more to grow it, more to ship it, and you end up with less profit. The planters within the sound of Stiles' voice stared at him incredulously. Why, poor old Farrell Alexander Baynard must be whirling in his grave, Lucas Wintercorn said. Stiles shrugged. His voice struck out at them, cold, aloof. Whirling. In his grave. Grave. That's the operative word, gentlemen. Mr. Baynard is in his grave. I'm running Blackoaks now, Mr. Wintercorn, and I'm running it my way. The way I've always felt it should have been run. Wintercorn exhaled heavily, his exasperation showing on his ruddy-lined face. Good God, man, you'll pardon my rough talk, Miss Cathy, taking the good Lord's name in vain, that in your lovely presence. But I can't hardly believe I'm hearing right. This lovely country is cotton land. Our economy was built and is based on cotton. Yet you appear to plan to stop using these vast acres of black oaks for that staple. I do, Stiles said. This is not my opinion only. I can tell you it is fully shared by Mr. Blanford Ware, the eminent banker from down here in Tallahassee. That money vulture? Rube Somerton looked as if he'd spit. Stiles spoke directly to Somerton. We may as well face it, sir. Cotton and sugarcane are moving to this loomy river valleys and lowlands. Stiles moved his chilled gaze across their stricken faces. I intend to raise a real money crop. I intend to supply those lowland growers with the slaves they'll need. My God, a nigger stud farm. Wintercorn shook his graying head in disbelief. You'll pardon me, Miss Kathy, but I never heard such a goddamn ugly thing in my life. Turning lovely old Blackoaks into a breeding farm for niggers. Stiles smiled coldly. No matter where they grow cotton and sugarcane, they're going to have slave labor. And they're going to have to get their slaves from somewhere. The slave import trade is banned by law, by England, and now by our Congress. Black slaves have got to come from those already on our farms. I intend to supply that market with the finest quality slaves. Fancy blacks. I refuse to cling to old ways and old habits when they are not only unprofitable, but eventually ruinous. They all stared at Stiles, but they didn't answer him. The old men, too, were filled with sullen rage to speak at all. They didn't trust themselves to say aloud, as Stiles Kenrick's guessed, the things they were thinking. The younger men at the table were secretly afraid Stiles Kenrick might be right. He'd been totally correct about the price for cotton. Traffic in slaves went against everything they believed. It was a low, vicious, and dehumanizing trade, beneath the dignity of gentlemen. And yet, there was no doubt money and power were passing them by, moving toward the swamps and the deltas. But niggers? Raise niggers as your staple crop? At this moment, and into this vibrant silence, Gil Talmadge and Link Tetherow returned from the well. They were brushed, carefully scrubbed, combed, and almost contrite. Both bowed clumsily and apologized profusely and awkwardly to Kathy Kenrick. Both found it difficult to speak directly to Kathy, not because they had insulted her with their boorish behavior at her table, but simply because she was a white gentlewoman and they had never learned to be poised or at ease with such company. Hunt watched the two young planters, his stomach taut with the contempt he felt for them and their hypocritical attitudes towards the upper-class white women. Either Talmadge or Tetherow might rape a negress, violate a white town girl, but the two of them went dumb, awkward, and clown-like before a plantation woman. As Gil and Link turned away from Kathy's chair at the head of the makeshift table, Miss Jamie Lee Seton made her dramatic entrance, mincing down the incline from the manor house on the plateau. Hunt grinned sardonically, watching her. Jamie Lee Seton's arrival was almost a regal event. All she needed was a court in attendance and a red carpet. She wore crinolines, tiny-wristed gloves, and pointed-toe slippers that winked beneath the flounced hems of her skirt. Behind her came Shiva, stumbling and half-running in order to keep a parasol consistently at the same angle before Jamie Lee's fragile skin in the early morning sun. Well, sir, Lambert Tetherow was the first of the planters to lunge upward to his feet as Jamie Lee approached. Will you all just look at who has graced us with her lovely presence? Look who has come down here to see us. Link, boy, your beautiful fiancée, your lovely goddess from Charleston. Hunt bit back derisively, smiling. Yes, here she came in all her affectation, her studied artificiality. Here was the belle of old Charleston, fresh from some early hour assignation with the nearest available male, black or white. Link Tetherow was transformed into a puerile dunce by the sight of Miss Jamie Lee Seton. He took one stunning glance toward his lace and silk goddess and thrust both fists towards heaven and yet go a yowl of exultance. Now you just stop that carrying on, Mr. Link Tetherow, Jamie Lee cautioned him in mock anger, but smiling. You just embarrass me to death. Ah, no, Miss Jamie Lee. Link looked ready to cry in desolation. I'm just so all-fired happy up to lay eyes on you, I just couldn't control myself. She blushed prettily. Well, you're just going to have to learn to control yourself, Mr. Link Tetherow. If you go on frightening me in front of perfect strangers like this, I'll just go running right back to Charleston, South Carolina. Link went close to Jamie Lee, flushed of face, bright of eye, looking as if he could barely restrain himself from taking her in his arms. Now don't you go a-grabbing me, Mr. Link Tetherow. Jamie Lee gave him the barest touch of her lips upon his cheeks, the chastest kiss Hunt had ever witnessed, north or south of the Mason-Dixon line. Watching her, Hunt decided he admired her. She was giving these men what they demanded of their young women, and her performance was flawless. She was good at what she did, and she was probably good in bed when she let herself go. He watched her tap at Link Tetherlow's blushing cheek with the top of her fan. I declare, I just don't know what I'm going to do about you, Mr. Link Tetherlow. You're so impulsive. You just sweep a poor girl off her feet. You just grab me. You're just so strong and big, I declare. Link stood awkward and helpless, speechless before his preening little coquette. Hunt looked away, shaking his head. His gaze raked across Kathy's, and he found her laughing with him. I'm going to take a break. That's the end of chapter 6. Not very erotic. Hopefully we'll get into something a little sexier in this chapter. Let's see. Chapter 7. The climbing sunrays burned away the last blue wisp of morning mist. Even as the crews of blacks moved in to clear away the breakfast table, Boz Pilser's guttural voice rose, shouting, "Head 'em out!" The drovers moved toward their wagons, and slaves hurried forward with the freshly watered, curried, and rested mounts of the landowners. Stiles chatted with some moments with the Lambert Tetherlow, who was to represent Blackoaks in the cotton sales at the railhead. Then he spoke with Boz Pilser, who was to accompany the cotton train as far as Mount Zion, but who would return before the auction began. Stiles did not want to watch the caravan start its trek along the trace at the foot of the plateau. He strode up the incline towards the manor houses, looking neither left nor right, though everyone else stood by, waving and shouting noisy farewells to the drovers and the planters astride their fine horses. With a shock of distinct pleasure, along with a belly-tightening ache in his loins, Hunt found himself alone near the barns with Kathy. His heart lurched at the splendid truth. She had arranged it that way. God, how beautiful she was! How delicate, gentle! How the ultimate unrefinement of everything these landed aristocrats down here were. Damn it! What was wrong with him? Why long and pant after a woman as unattainable as Kathy? He could never have her. He had nothing to offer her. The barriers between them were insurmountable, and yet he admitted God had never made another woman he would want as wildly as he wanted the unobtainable Kathy Kenrick. Without speaking about it, they walked together slowly up the grassy incline, away from the manor house on the plateau, toward the Fieldstone Chapel on the pleasant knoll beyond. Here they could be alone, if only for a little while, and they didn't have to put this need into words either. They didn't have to. As they left the barn area, now suddenly quiet with the planters and the wagons and the children and the dogs all gone, Blade touched his finger and thumb to his forehead as though doffing his cap to Kathy. Hunt stared at him, feeling a sense of shock. Blade's smile made his red gold face beautiful with that sadness from antiquity as in which it gripped at Hunt and haunted him. Good Lord, Hunt said. He's in love with you, Kathy. He loves me. He's not in love with me. Blade's always loved me since we were children. You make it sound like something from afar. He loves you as a slave might love his mistress, from a safe distance. I suppose that's the only way you can admit it to yourself. She laughed at him. That's the way it is. It's not anything like you're suggesting. He is a slave. And stop looking like that. I've never even been alone with him, since we were 7 or 8. He knows his place, and I know mine. I've known that he loves me, but that's it. That's the end of it. That's the way it is. How comfortable you people have got everything worked out. As long as a black man never has a human thought, he gets along fine. Have you ever looked at him? At Blade? Of course. Don't you really see him? Don't you see the sadness in him? He looks so damn sad, even when he's smiling like that. She laughed again. None of us is happy all the time. And I don't think Blade is really very sad. As beautiful as he is, he probably has the wenches standing in line outside his cabin. Now Hunt laughed. You know something I've learned in my misspent life, Kathy? A man can have 100 women, but he has nothing unless he has the one woman he truly wants. How very pretty. Oh, I can talk beautifully, poetically, charm the birds off the limbs. One of the few worthwhile arts I learned in 6 years at Harvard. Kathy smiled and took his hand. I'm jealous of all those years before I knew you. Don't be. I was less even than I am now, only half alive. Certain I knew all that was worthwhile, opinionated, superior, arrogant. And I didn't even come alive until I came here, until I saw you. Kathy laughed. Until you stopped wearing your pince-nez. Ah, yes, my symbol of superiority. He drew her close against him. She shivered and drew away. Half the people in our world are watching us, she warned. When in the hell can I admit aloud to all the world that I love you? I think you just did, she teased. Then abruptly she stopped, smiling. Her mood altered, the way a bright day darkens when the sun is suddenly obscured by clouds. I know you love me, she said. Isn't that enough? He sighed, heavily chilled. No, I don't think even you know. If you did, you wouldn't keep us apart like this. When I ache, literally ache, Kathy, with need for you. Poor Hunt, she said. I'm sorry. I'm what I am. I almost said I'm sorry you love me, but that's not true. I'm not sorry. That's all I have, that you love me. But I've sense enough to know it isn't fair to you. I lie in bed at night lonely, and I know how lonely you must be. I know how lonely I am. I'm only down the hall. He tried unsuccessfully to smile. It's not that simple. Or maybe it is, and I won't let it be. She took his hand and drew him down upon a fieldstone barrier behind her mother's chapel. They were concealed from the house, sheltered by a flowering bay shrub. The sweetness of the bay shrub saddened Hunt, though he could not say why, except that their gentle, fragile, and transient fragrance brought Kathy into his mind wherever he was. I know my marriage to Stiles has failed, she said. Over. Finished. And yet, until I can be free, I remain his wife. I can't have an affair with you while he and I are still married. He'll never let you go. He must, Hunt. He doesn't want me. She shuddered. He never has. He needs you. And that's a much more compelling reason for him to have hold on you. You are the loveliest girl any of us has ever seen. His possessing you as his wife sets him apart from ordinary mortals. You are a prized possession for the world to envy, and you are his armor. His armor? His protective shield against those who hold unnatural men in contempt. Who would believe a man married to a woman as lovely as you would rather be caressing young boys? Oh, God. Memory, ugly as day-old dishwater, flooded through her. She pressed the back of her hand over her mouth. He drew her close. Oh, Kathy, I'm sorry. I know it's bad enough without me saying it aloud. Please forgive me. We can't go on being afraid of the truth. Why not? I can't think of anything that hurts more cruelly than the unadorned truth. She shook her head, physically rejecting the ugly associations. The only real truth is that I love you. No, that's only part of the real truth. The sad part is that you do love me, but you won't let me love you. You mean in my bed? He laughed. Yours or mine. Kathy didn't smile. That's what I meant when I said I was sorry you love me. Sorry for you. Because of what I am. From birth I've been taught, and I've believed, that a girl like me marries one man, is faithful to him, and keeps herself only unto him until she dies. I try, Hunt. I swear, I try to come to you, on your terms, as other people seem able to accept love, wherever they find it, and when they find it, and the hell with anything else. At night, I long to get up and to run to you. I lie sleepless, ill with longing, but I can't. I can't. He kissed her gently, but the irony edging in his voice was less gentle. Maybe Stiles will settle it for us. You think he'd give me a divorce? No. I think any morning now he'll send me away, as he should have done so long ago. We all know I'm not teaching Morgan anything new. I'm not earning my keep. I hang on as long as I can, only because of you. I can't imagine life when I can't see you, if only for a moment on the stairway. She caressed his face. Then you'll never go. You'll stay because I want you. I may never let you go. She gestured helplessly. There's so much against us. If I divorced Stiles, my church would excommunicate me when I married you. That doesn't seem too important right now, but it has been my church all my life. I've believed in it with all my heart. I still do. Hell, why are we even talking about it? I can't ask you to give up your church. For what? I don't believe in anything except you, and I you. Hell knows I can't ask you to leave Blackoaks, your family, your security, your place in life. I have nothing to offer. There's you. No, there's not even me. Let's not forget who I am. I love you, but that doesn't seem miraculously to convert me into a worthwhile human being. I'm still the pusillanimous. I'm still the pusillanimous fugitive who came sneaking down here because I was unwilling to fight for a woman in New England. I am still Hunt Campbell, too enlightened to fight even when attacked. I'm the same cowardly ass who almost got your brother killed when he had the courage to fight my battle. I've never fought for anything. I've pretended it was superior intellect that placed me above common brawling. Very likely the sordid truth is that I'm more coward than idealist. Let's not forget that a pretentious stuffed shirt I am. She kissed him lightly, lingeringly. She offered no protest when his hand closed in on the full roundness of her peach-colored breast. Okay, finally, now we're into something here. She felt her breast swell to his caress, every part of her body aching with need for him. It was as if every nerve were centered under his caressing palm. He bent his head, kissed the pulse at the base of her throat. She spoke in a breathless tone. If you want something bad enough, you'll fight for it. He gazed at the satiny beauty of her breast. I know one thing. I've never fought. I've always run away from fights. But if I could stand and fight for anything, and I don't promise you I could, it would be for you. Please don't hate yourself. I don't. That's the sad truth. I've always deplored physical violence. I've always believed myself superior, exceptional, set apart, until I realized what it would cost me to have you. Then I am forced to face the truth about myself. I have to admit my fat-witted weaknesses. I can only drag you down, Kathy. I have nothing to offer you. You're all I want. That's because you've never known anything except a life where you've been cared for, protected, and miserable. I've never been truly happy, because I could never be truly happy unless I were loved. As I know, I must be loved. I must be loved or find life empty. But then I face the truth. I know you deserve better than me. Better than you? Why, there's no beauty to match your loveliness. There's no one better. You're saying that in excitement, she smiled. I can see how excited. Oh, I'm in agony. That's what it really is. Oh, Hunt, I'm so sorry. We shouldn't have come up here alone. Don't be sorry. Agony is my choice. I'd rather be in agony wanting you than lying in bed with 3 concubines at my command. She shook her head. No, I'm not worth it. I've already failed one man. He held her close and kissed her. Kathy, my God, don't torment yourself. Don't feel guilty. You haven't failed a man. You've been tricked into marriage by a pervert who needed to hide behind the appearance of virile manhood. There's no one for me but you, she whispered, and we will find a way. I'll make him let me go. I will. He laughed at her violence, took her in his arms. She turned her face up to him, her heart pounding. When his hand cupped her breast again, she quivered, her whole body quaking. In his arms, she felt younger than her 22 years. She felt as if she was a young girl again, a very young girl with her first love, her first lover. Okay, it's starting to heat up again. Okay, we're on to chapter 8. Hunt was late getting into the terrace outside the sunroom where he conducted classes for Morgan. He came across a manicured plateau, sweated, slightly breathless, and in some inner agony. He found Moab and Soapy with their heads bent together over one of the reading books. Soapy patiently traced the words with his finger for Moab awkwardly to mouth after much prodding and indecision. Soapy leapt up guiltily as the tutor approached and dropped the book as if it were fiery hot. Hunt pretended not to have seen this byplay, as he ignored the fact for months now Soapy had secretly been teaching Moab to read. He knew the boy stole off to secret places along the creek behind the quarters, where once they'd played pirates in order to read the simple primary books Hunt had lost and Soapy had recovered. Stiles opposed letting any Negroes learn how to read or write, Besides, there was a state statute against anyone teaching a black slave to read or write or cipher. "Where is Morgan?" Hunt asked. When Soapy looked at Moab and grinned sheepishly, Hunt decided not to press the issue. Whatever had delayed Morgan both amused and dismayed his body slave, and Hunt did not pursue it. It did not matter whether Morgan attended his daily classes or not. Morgan had learned painfully to read signs, to write his own and Soapy's names. He could not concentrate long enough to solve the simplest arithmetic problem. A day when Morgan was late to class was an easier time for all of them. Soapy's dark face showed the blood that had flooded upward into it, and the keen embarrassment he felt in not being able to talk about Morgan. He sat with eyes averted, recalling the way he had walked into the bedroom less than an hour ago and found Morgan sprawled on his back across the mattress, masturbating furiously. Astonished, Soapy had asked, "What you doing, Morg?" He knew well enough what Morgan was doing. Morgan was sweated under the savagery of his own self-abuse. Soapy laughed again. "You better stop. You're going to get hair in the palm of your hand." Morgan stopped long enough to curse at him. "You go to hell, Soapy." Soapy walked slowly forward. "What's the matter, Morg?" Morg stopped but continued to grip himself fiercely. "I can't help it, Soapy. It's the third time this morning. I've done it. I just can't seem to stop. I reckon I'm going crazy at night, but I just can't stop." Soapy sat down on the side of the bed and clucked sympathetically. "What's wrong? What happened? I always plumb love to beat my meat, but I never knowed you to be so partial to it." "I never was. What happened?" Morgan worked his fist with a few strokes. "Cousin Jamie Lee," he muttered after a moment. "You best stay away from that white gal. And you best stop talking about her. She said niggers shouldn't talk about white ladies." Soapy shook his head. "I'm still telling you, she's bad. Badder than any black slut I've ever heard tell about." Morgan stroked himself slowly. "What'd she do to you?" "Nothing, except that one time she got me in a room to fix something that didn't need to be fixing. That white gal was the onlyest thing that needed fixing. She swore she'd yell rape if I didn't do it to her." "Did you do it?" "Didn't enjoy it none. I was so scared. I nearly peed." "She wouldn't let me do it." Morgan's voice shook and his eyes filled with tears. "What you mean? That white gal let anyone do it. She told me I had to wait in that empty guest room for her this morning, or she'd say I'd been trying to sneak looks at her while she's bathing. I waited. Thank God she never showed up." "She was here," Morgan said. "She wanted me to do it, but I didn't know how. Soapy, I didn't know a girl's hole was way down there between her legs like that." "Yeah," Soapy said, "they sure are. They're easy to get at if and they want you to, but it can be pretty tough getting to that sweet thing if they don't." "I wish you'd have told me, Soapy." "You never asked me, Morg. I figured you'd know." "Well, I didn't. And she laughed at me. And she was all naked. The prettiest thing I ever seen in all my life. Them big tits she wanted me to suck, and her laying there, a-panting, and me not knowing no way what to do. She laughed at me, and she put her gown on and walked out. Only I can't think about nothing but the way she looked, all pretty and naked and laying there with her legs apart. She should have put her legs up, made it easier for you. What am I going to do, Soap? I can't walk around here with a hard-on all the time. I either got a hard-on or I feel like I want to cry. I either got to whip it off or cry. I can't go around people like that." "What are you going to do? It's time to go to your class." "Well, I ain't going. Not today. Not till I can stop getting a big hard-on. I'm going to lay right here and beat it till it just lays still like it used to." "What am I going to tell Master Hunt?" "Tell that Yankee I said go to hell. Go back home." "I'll tell him you're sick," Soapy said. "It won't be no lie," Morgan said. His fist moved faster. Hunt was telling the boys about the history of the Fulani people, those aristocratic Sudanese from where Moab and Blade had descended. Excited, Moab strutted like an emperor, angering Soapy. The two boys were tussling when Miss Jamie Lee appeared in a riding habit. All three of them stopped in mid-breath and held their positions in tableau, staring at Miss Jamie Lee. Hunt felt his face flush, and he knew he looked as awkward and as guilty as the slave boys. They gazed at the lovely picture Miss Jamie Lee presented. She was outfitted in a chic new habit with black boots and a saucy hat perched on the side of her golden curls, which were pinned up becomingly at the nape of her neck. She clapped the palm of her left hand smartly with the riding crop, studying them. "I hesitated to intrude," she said with a disdainful glance at Hunt, "but I needn't have worried. Nothing very serious seems to be going on here." "How may we serve you?" Hunt inquired, awed at the voluptuous bulge of her breast above that tiny waist. But he could see in her chilled eyes that he had made an unyielding and unforgiving little enemy. She glanced at him imperiously. "Cousin Stiles says Moab is to guide me. I'm going riding. Moab is to come along. Dear Cousin Stiles says I couldn't possibly go riding alone." Soapy clapped his hand over his mouth to stifle a giggle. Moab looked uncomfortable but helpless. Jamie Lee's face tinted pinkly, and she hurled Soapy a brief murderous glance. "Come along, Moab. Cousin Stiles has ordered our horses brought to the front door." Moab glanced worriedly at Hunt, appealing for help. Hunt avoided his eye. Cousin Jamie Lee had already turned on her leather heel and was striding towards the French doors at the sunroom, imperiously anticipating that Moab would heel obediently. After a moment, he followed her. Soapy sank to the fieldstone wall that enclosed the terrace. He laughed. "Poor old Moab," he whispered. "Poor old King Moab. He granddaddy one of the noble Fulanis." Okay. I wonder what's going to happen. Oh, yes. Chapter 9. Stiles walked into the small downstairs office and closed the thick door after him. He sagged into the high back-swiveled chair that had belonged to his father-in-law, feeling the sense of desperation building in him. He was glad those damned wagons were gone, those stupid planters cleared out. He knew what old Rube Summerlin had meant, finding fault with the comparatively few wagons of cotton he was shipping. Half the number old man Baynard would have shipped. Somerton was implying that the cotton sales would fail by half to meet the cost of maintaining the plantation. He had understood what Somerton was saying. The hell of it was, so had every other planter sitting at that table. The hell with them. The fact was, Blackoaks had come up with less than a bale per 30 acres. Disastrous. They had pushed the Negroes. Boss Pilzer had driven them, and he had driven Pilzer. The cotton simply wasn't there, in grade, quality, or quantity. He had to find an answer, but he already knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to find it at increased cotton acreage. He would show Rube Somerton and those other stupid sons of bitches. Blackoaks certainly would not be the first plantation to convert to raising blacks for market, but it could offer the best stock. This was the way. First to solvency, then to great riches, which would make all this sacrifice worthwhile. Meantime, he stared with a growing sense of helplessness at the bills which had accumulated in the ornate pecan wood holder on the old desk. Many of these duns had come in within weeks of Baynard's unexpected death. Stiles had paid as many as he could with the money he'd discovered in the Blackoaks account at the First Bank of Mount Zion. He'd stopped making disbursements when he saw how dangerously low the balance in that account was dropping. He'd had no difficulty in arranging with the new president of First Bank of Mount Zion to transfer most of Baynard Blackoaks' accounts to Stiles' personal account. Neither he nor bank president Luke Scroggins had questioned the legality of the transfer. Scroggins, for some reason Stiles didn't understand, seemed secretly pleased to make the transfer of funds for him. As he recalled, it had been Scroggins who had suggested leaving a token balance in the Blackoaks general account. Stiles shifted in his chair. His immediate reaction had been that there was illegality in his appropriating plantation funds to his own account, even if he used this money to discharge current plantation obligations. Leaving a small amount of money in the General Blackoaks account would forestall any question that might have arisen had the general account been closed out totally. Neither he nor Scroggins had mentioned the fact out loud. He had not asked. Scroggins had volunteered no information. Stiles flushed, feeling faintly warm about the starched collar of his linen shirt. There would be no questions anyway from anyone but Farrell. Yes, Farrell Baynard would cause trouble if he probed too deeply. Luckily, in these past months, Stiles had been able to keep pressure on Ms. Clare until he wrestled a power of attorney from her on a day when she appeared more lucid than usual. Let Farrell try to break that. Farrell was a Jesuit priest now, at least a novice. Let him stay there. With Miss Clare's power of attorney, Stiles felt secure in his position as undisputed master of Blackoaks, even where Farrell was concerned. The hell of it was that, even though no one questioned his authority, everything was crowding in on him. Farrell might walk into this house at any moment. If the bastard insisted on accounting, there would be no way to conceal the financial liabilities that were pushing the estate to the brink of disaster. Stiles stared at his clenched fist. He could work it out if he just had time. He saw chillingly now how many times old man Baynard must have sagged in that same chair, a victim to these same thoughts. I could work it out if I just had time. Time was his worst enemy. The growing mound of bills and arrears, the rising cost of maintaining this 900 square miles of feudal estate, this threat of Farrell's imminent arrival, showed how little time remained to him. Finding accounts overdue and overwhelming would provide Farrell the justification for assuming the management of his family's farm. Somehow he had to buy more time. He got up from the chair, feeling caged in the small office. He prowled its restrictive space. From window to desk, from door to bookshelves, small constricted paths to nowhere. He stood at the window for a long time, staring across the plateau toward the fieldstone chapel on the grassy knoll above it. The bitter and ironic angle to his whole dilemma was that he had options. The same options the elder Baynard had faced, but resisted. All these years he had managed to outrun the marshals. Baynard could continue to draw down larger and larger amounts from Garrett Blansford's Ware's bank down in Tallahassee, Florida. He could have borrowed sizable amounts from the First Bank of Mount Zion, something Baynard would not have done under any circumstances. A landowner didn't like his neighbors to know the extent of his indebtedness. This indebtedness was something you keep concealed like a skeleton in the family closet. Baynard himself had never borrowed money from the Bank of Mount Zion. He had finally repaid Ware's bank in full just before his death. But Baynard had something Stiles no longer possessed, the supplemental income from the large whiskey still on the property. Stiles had never realized the size of that income until a devastating fire had wiped out the plant and ended the cash flow from liquor wholesalers in Mobile. Baynard had been able to meet the daily expenses of the plantation from that whiskey production operation. Yet even with this source of cash supply, Baynard had sunk deeper into debt so that at his death, he had left the estate badly encumbered. Another option open to Baynard, and daily more alluring to Stiles, as it must have been to the hard-pressed Baynard ahead of him, was the sale of slaves. Baynard had sold off slaves, one or two at a time, secretly, ashamedly. The old man had tried to hide those transactions from his family as if they were dishonorable, shameful, a mark of disgrace. Cotton had never, in the past 15 years at least, paid expenses of operating Blackoaks. The firm's obligation had been met when they were not deferred as far into the future as possible, through the sale of whiskey and black slaves, and two vile and commercial enterprises. Baynard's pretense was that his whiskey was exceptional and that he'd been pressured by the connoisseurs of fine spirits to commercialize, and that he had done so unwillingly. Stiles was a Kenrick of Winter Hill Plantation, where outwitting creditors had been refined to an art, where the shameful acts of poverty were concealed by desperate displays of gentility. He had lived through that kind of genteel poverty, pretense, and deception. He wanted no more of it. He was already wed to Kathy Baynard. Now he had taken command of Blackoaks. The potential for great wealth was here, and he meant to realize that potential no matter what he had to do. First he had to admit, as Baynard never had, that this old plantation would have gone on the auction block years ago except for the whiskey sales and slave trading. But even the surreptitious sale of slaves to itinerant slave peddlers and to other planters was not the operation that should have brought Baynard at least temporary satisfaction of all its debts, an opportunity to establish a debt-free base to build on. And Baynard had gone ill with an ulcerated stomach and high blood pressure which finally killed him, rather than avail himself of his golden option, the sale of his two Fulani bucks, the fancy-grade slaves Blade and Moab. Stiles sweated, remembered the way the slave breeder Baxter Simon had come east from his stud farms in Carthage, Mississippi, to offer $10,000 in gold for each of the Filani boys. Stiles understood fully only now the terrible conflicts that must have tore old Baynard apart, as he finally refused Simon's offer. And after Simon departed, Mr. Cletus Dennison had appeared with his smiles and a blank check offer for the fine Filani animals. Their prime animal stock, Dennison had said repeatedly to Baynard with that unfailing, unshakable smile. I can afford to find or to import purity Filani woman to mate. You know better, sir. Baynard was flushed of face, a vein standing like a blue pencil in his temple. The law forbids. The law forbids! Dennison had laughed and clapped Baynard on the shoulder. The law is for people who can't afford to circumvent it, Baynard. The law is for people like you. I'll find Filani wenches, Baynard had whispered. Hoarse, sweated, driven. Dennison had laughed again. Not unless you are willing or financially prepared to go outside the law, you won't. It would require a small fortune and delicate diplomacy and dangerous personal contact to arrange to abduct and smuggle into this country a half-dozen Filani wenches. It would mean a custom-planned adventure, old friend. It demands the right people, a lot of time, a lot of old money, and no conscience. Baynard shook his head. I've planned, dreamed, worked too hard for too long. I can't give up now, and I won't. I shall find Filani wenches. And if you find them, old friend of mine, you'll also find yourself bidding for them against resources comparable to and far exceeding my own. Can you honestly say you're prepared to do this? Now, Stiles prowled the office. Baynard had somehow resisted Dennison's smiling, patient, and unrelenting overtures. Baynard had believed that if he could hang on, find Filani wenches, he could climb from the brink of ruin to solvency and opulence, breeding Filani fancy slaves. Stiles laughed with a self-mocking bitterness. He and his deceased father-in-law had little in common, but they shared that same irresistible dream, even when it was almost impossible of accomplishment. I am going to stop it right there. We will pick up tomorrow, or I'm sorry, the next show, where we left off. Not a whole lot of erotica, little hints of it, but I think we're in for some big erotica in the next reading. Thank you very much for joining me tonight. And you can find all this, if you're watching this on a different channel, you can find all this archived on bedtimewithbruce.com. We're going to be at that site where if you have any comments or questions, you can send those to us. We're going to have a forum on the website. I think right now we have it at bedtimewithbruce@gmail.com. So send us a note, drop us a line, tell us hello, tell us what you think, tell us that you're listening and watching. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you very much for joining me this evening. It has been a pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great night.